Squirrels! Today's guest on Blind Squirrel Talk, famous in a small town, is Cannon Manley. This Georgia Tech graduate is a registered architect and designer, and his expertise can now be seen in Maysville, Georgia. Cannon will share his journey that brought him to Maysville, as well as his vision for the future. We are so excited for you to meet Cannon Manley.
Also, don't forget to find us on Facebook and Instagram at Blind Squirrel Talk and on X at Blind Squirrel PC. If you enjoy the show, please remember to leave us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts. Plus, if you write us a review there or leave us a comment on Spotify or YouTube, we'll read it out on a future episode of the show.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back again to Blind Squirrel Talk, and we're really excited today. I'm Lulu.
I'm Kim, and we've got Cannon Manley with us. He's a registered architect and knower of all. He's here to do some work in our city. We're going to talk a little bit about that and get some ideas on how we might be able to make Maysville a little bit better.
Yeah, definitely.
So tell us about yourself.
Sure. So I'm from Atlanta. I say Atlanta. I was born, in Piedmont. Then I grew up in Duluth, Norcross, and I went to schools all around Metro Atlanta, North, South, East, West. And then I went to Georgia Tech, so I stayed in Atlanta. When I was in school, I worked for a general contractor. So I was in school for architecture, working for a GC. So I learned how buildings actually got put together, the tectonic application of architectural drawings. Like an architect may say do this, but like when you try to get your hand behind that stud wall to get a screw in, how's that possible? So I learned like the reality of applying architectural drawings to the built environment. Graduated from school. I went right into my master's degree for architecture and city planning dual degree. So when I got out of school, I went to work for a couple architectural firms. Did a lot of car dealerships, some multifamily stuff, a lot of credit unions, did some residential homes, switched gears, went to work for a high-rise developer, architect, so did some high-rise design there, working on 32-story buildings in downtown LA. Those were interesting. And then switched gears again in 2016, went to work for a real estate developer. Renovating old apartment homes. So they would acquire old apartment homes, give them a facelift, new clubhouse, redo the whole management structure of the property, and then own and operate those. So I worked for them until I became a registered architect. And then I became a licensed contractor in 2018. And then I was like, I'm going to do my own thing. So I left and started doing my own design build stuff. My first project was in Maysville.
No.
Yeah.
Tell us.
The client found me on Google. I was moonlighting. I had ads on Google. He found me on Google. He explained his idea of a data center. It was novel, unique, kind of oddball. And I was like, this is interesting. I met him at a Starbucks. I did some sketches for him. I was like, this is what I would do if I was you. Mm-hmm. This is too big for me to take while I'm working on another job, so I'm going to have to pass. A month later, he called me. He was like, no one else understands what I'm talking about. Will you please do this? I was like, fine. So I did the architectural drawings for him at night from like 6 p.m. to 10 p.m. every night for months. Got the drawings. And then as soon as the drawings were running through Maysville about to be permitted, I got my contractor's license. And I was like, hey,
I'll do the build.
Let me build it for you too. He was like, okay. I was like, great. That's my stepping stone. Quit my job. I was like, all right, this is going to pay me for 6 months. I'm going to build this, and in the next 6 months, I got to get some new clients. Got some new clients, and then the ball's been rolling since 2018. So we've done a bunch of multifamily stuff, a bunch of residential stuff, a bunch of commercial build-outs, some historic preservation stuff, an old 1875 building that was 9 feet wide by 40 feet long. We got a coffee shop put in that thing down in Lawrenceville. I did the second phase of the data center here in Maysville. I did the design. And now we're looking at some new opportunities up here.
So we're on to phase 3 here, correct?
That's what we're going for.
Can you tell us what's different about phase 3 in comparison to phase 1 and 2?
Yeah. So and I got to be a little. I have to have a little discretion when I talk about it.
Exactly.
But Yeah, it's using a better system. So the cooling system's a little bit better, and it's a little bit larger. Well, a lot bit larger, and the ownership is really on board with, doing this right and by the book. I'm really on board with like getting this thing done as professionally and as cleanly and as smoothly as possible. We really want this to be a project that we put above all our other projects. So.
Okay. What I really want to talk about is your work with the Conservancy and what you've done to help small towns revitalize, because that's what we're looking for here.
Sure. So, so as an architect and urban planner, well, I'm not an urban planner, but as an architect with a background in urban planning education, I have like a large fondness for big cities, right? I love big cities, but I also really love small towns and the smaller towns, especially that are sprinkled out throughout the suburbs. Like I live in Alpharetta. I love historic Alpharetta. I love historic Roswell, Norcross, and Duluth. I love what they've done to help revitalize those historic town centers and make them more vibrant communities. It's been pounded into my brain about like how kind of depressing the urban growth in Metro Atlanta had been from the 70s up until the early 2000s.
Right.
Like it's not pedestrian friendly. It doesn't foster a vibrant area. It's like get in your car, go to where you're going, do your thing, and then leave.
If you can find parking.
Right.
Yeah.
So I wanted to promote this book right here, The Death and Life of Great American Cities. So I love Jane Jacobs because she cracks the whip in this book. There's no holds barred. She rips apart the way, and I think this was written in the 67 or something like that. So she cracks the whip on how like the way we in America had been designing our cities had no basis on reality, right? And one key note I took from this book was that, and it's something I see a lot in architecture school, I see a lot in like just general architectural thought, is that an architect or an urban designer will go somewhere like Maysville and they'll be like, okay, you guys want to revitalize? Let's put a big grass square here, and then we'll put some buildings here because those buildings look really nice, and we'll put a big fountain there, and we'll put a monument there, and we'll build you a city center, and then your city will be revitalized. And what that fails to recognize is that like the most critical part about the human experience in spaces and places is the human experience, right? You don't build things and force people into them. You build things, or really you build a framework and a skeleton for allow things to grow that foster the way people actually behave in spaces, right?
Right.
So it takes a fundamental understanding about what the people in Maysville like about their life in Maysville and what they want their life to be like in regards to improving the growth of their future town, right? Like you got to understand that. And if you can understand that through workshops and communicating with the people, then you can start to build a policy framework that allows for natural, organic infill and growth, right? You can't come in and just slap up 30 buildings and be like, there you go.
Right.
You have to have a policy that's in place so that when private developers come in, they are bound to this network that grows the town the way you want the town to grow.
Right.
And some of it takes some public infrastructure and installments that come from Maysville's money. A lot of it is policy that's set up so that you can rely on these private developers to build Maysville the way you want to build.
You know, the people want somewhere to go. We're not walkable. We did receive a sidewalk grant. We're hoping to be able to get from areas to downtown.
Without being
go
run
eat,
over.
get
Without
an
being
ice
run
cream,
over.
go to a coffee shop.
Yeah.
But it's slow. It's slow, and it's frustrating at times.
So change is always something that the clash between progression and change is always going to be there, right? Like it is, right? Because nostalgia holds a like important piece in people's hearts, like, right? I remember how it was when I was growing up and I want it to be
Right.
like that.
Yes.
Right.
Right. So I think like a big tool in breaking down that barrier is isolating what parts of that nostalgia are really important and how you can include those in the future growth, right? Like change doesn't mean raising the past and building a brand new future. Like a more useful way of talking about change is like, how can we inject some of that nostalgia into our future growth? Like, right, what is it that you liked about growing up here, and can we incorporate that into the future growth that still allows vibrancy and like, you know, and for me, like going through school, like for me, the biggest thing I took out of architecture school is like really trying to understand the core of the problem, and then really trying to communicate clearly how like we can identify the core of the problem and provide solutions, right? Like you can't come in with like this preset notion of here's what we're going to do. You have to communicate with people. And you know, a big part of this this book, The Death and Life of Great American Cities, is understanding that like what people like in a place is other people.
Right.
Like that's what they like,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Like you can build the most beautiful square in the world, but if people have no reason to be there and it's empty, it's boring and it's vacant and it's sterile, right? Like you could have the grittiest, crappiest buildings, but if there's like a lot of people being that, they got a barbershop there, a bar there, a restaurant there, homes there, a butcher shop, mechanic shop, a bike shop, a coffee shop, and there's people going there all during all hours of the day from 7 a.m. to 3 a.m. and people are there all the time, it creates a vibrant place that people want to be around.
Right. I agree.
And there's a lot of things that go into making that, right? Policy, money, infrastructure, master plans, sidewalks, good streets. I have another book I didn't bring up here because it's really big, but there's a really important way to look at how you design streets, and designing streets and sidewalks and planning buffers and how they demark private versus public space is pretty critical to developing a vibrant space, right? You don't want a 4-lane highway blowing through a downtown, right? Like slow traffic down and create a more pedestrian friendly place. And people are like, if you slow traffic down, it's like, fine, if cars want to move fast, they'll go around it. But a lot of times my office is right next to historic Roswell. There's a really fast highway to get to my office about half a mile to the right. And then there's the slow Canton Street where I have to go 25 going through it. A lot of times I take the slow Canton Street because I just like to look at all the restaurants and all the people.
Right.
It takes me a little longer to get to my office, but it's more fun to drive through for me. So like understanding like how your physical infrastructure impacts your development of your town is pretty important.
I think we have a big challenge there strictly because we have two straight state roads that join, and there is no way to get from this side to the other side because the railroad.
Right.
So we've got to figure out, and I have laid awake at night thinking, how could we rearrange how we come through downtown? And I don't know.
Yeah.
I need a professional.
Yeah.
We need him.
Yes, we do.
Maysville needs him.
Well,
Council person.
Yeah. So I mean, then when you get into that, you're talking about working with GDOT. You're talking about working with a bunch of other people.
And we've started the conversation with GDOT. There's a lot that can be done to help what we've got now, but the GDOT and the railroad have to come together.
Yeah.
Apparently, the railroad can be a little tricky to work with.
Yeah.
But we've started.
Yeah.
The path is open, and we're going to try to get there. We'll see how it comes, but just hoping.
Well, I mean, it's really good that you're like thinking about these things, because unbridled growth is not good.
No.
And no growth is not good. And super highly controlled growth is also not good, right? Like having super strict zoning areas where like a few people have decided the fate of the next 60 years of a town may not be the best thing either. It may work out, but it may not, so it takes a lot of work that has to do with a lot of different people from a lot of different trades and industries and backgrounds all talking together and coming up with a consensus.
Right.
So when you first came to Maysville, and because you look at it through dual eyes, so you, Mr. Architect,
Yeah.
and Mr. Person, when you first drove into Maysville, what were your thoughts? And do you separate? Do you say, oh, I want to do this, or I mean, when you looked at Maysville, what
My
were your
first
thoughts?
thought was I wanted that drag right across the street to be more vibrant. That was my very first thought. I was like, look at that. There's old buildings that are cool.
Yeah.
I love old buildings. Like, I'm a sucker for old buildings. I saw that, and I was like, I want to see people walking up and down that sidewalk. That was my very first thought. It's still my thought every time I see it. I'm like, I wish I could see, like, people going to and from lunch, going into a barbershop right there.
Right.
You know?
Well, we're hoping. We have some challenges too with parking. We don't have enough parking for people to come. That's why we need to be more walkable.
Yeah.
Because I live right quarter mile down the road, but I have no sidewalk, and the roads here are fairly narrow.
Yeah.
I've been knocked off the side of the road a couple times.
Well, literally, you have been
I
knocked off the road.
I have. So, so many things to think about. The sidewalks are in our near future. GDOT and the railroad talking is going to be a positive step in the right direction, I think. But getting some of our buildings fixed up and enforcing our code.
Yeah.
I mean, some of our buildings that could be, had they been maintained in some regard, brought back to their historic, yesteryear. But I'm hoping with some code enforcement and some positive change, we can get some of that to
And if
happen.
I'm not mistaken, you guys have some pretty good anchors for employment around here, right?
We do.
Yes.
Like,
we do.
you have-
We're in a great. We're 4 miles from the interstate.
Yeah, I
we're
mean,
in
you
a-
have great anchors for like population,
We do.
right? So like now the trick is like, how do we get those people to live here instead of commuting from where they are now,
right.
right?
It's a challenge, but we need you. We're
Yeah.
going to
Yes,
continue
we
to talk.
do. Yes, we
There's
do.
there's a lot of things you can do, but yeah. So what else? Tell me what else you want to talk about.
I want to talk about like how long the project you're currently working on. How long before it'll be completed? Do you think, or what's the timeline?
So, again, I always have to speak with discretion on this
that's-
sort of
okay,
stuff,
yeah.
but, we're trying to move as quickly as possible. So we're on an accelerated timeline, and we're trying to, get in and get out.
Well, that was a selfish question because I'm thinking when he finishes, he could come help Maysville.
Well, I'll be
You've
here.
got some great ideas that would really help our city.
I'll be here a lot. So
Good.
I have one quick question after Googling you.
Yeah.
Tell me what amphibious architecture is.
Okay, so so when I was at Georgia Tech, it was a dual degree. When I worked with the Georgia Conservancy, we talked about this before the podcast, but I didn't talk about this on the podcast. The Georgia Conservancy had a program called Blueprints for Successful Communities, where they would go into communities that were struggling with population or growth control, something like that. They would get the architecture and urban design students at Georgia Tech to come do workshops. I worked on one at Moreland, in Coweta County. And I also worked on some coastal ones. And then that turned into my master's thesis, which dealt with sea level rise in the future. So I specifically dealt with Tybee Island, which is
Lucky you.
Savannah's beach.
Yeah. Yeah.
So Tybee's they already have some problems with flooding with the King's Tide. They have a real low topographical map. I think the highest point on the island is 6 feet above sea level rise. Oh. So they're going to be having some, potential issues in the future with King's Tides, rising sea level water. The thesis of mine was an idea that if you are facing sea level rise, you have 3 options. You retreat, you defend, or you adapt. So you either vacate the island and the island's gone. You defend by building giant walls and dredging the intercoastal and pouring sand back on the beach every single week, and just like you're whistling into the wind, right? Like,
Yeah.
Or you can adapt. So my solution was the adaptation solution. It dealt with a planning structure called transfer of development rights. So I think it's TDR, or it might be TDLR. So the idea was that you institute a policy of transfer of development rights where if people were to sell their coastal beachfront homes to Tybee Island. So you sell your home to Tybee Island. In exchange for a fair market price, you additionally get development rights that are counter to the code. So the code may say you can only build a residential structure here that's 2 stories in the mainland. So what we did was we identified a interior part of the island that we would build up. And then if you transfer your development rights, you sell your home back to us, to the island, to the city. That is raised and becomes beachfront to allow for the sea level to rise. And then now you're allowed to build a 6-story townhome that you wouldn't normally.
Be able to
So
build.
it's a monetary incentive for developers because now you can make 3 times as much money as you normally could.
Did they adopt that?
No, it was
Okay.
just a thesis. So there was the transfer of development rights, which allowed for a denser growth in the interior of the island. And then on the back side of the island, on the marsh, there were some schemes for some homes that could be homes that sat on the ground during dry seasons. And then when the water came in, they would rise up and float. So
That's cool.
They have those in Amsterdam.
Oh, I did not know
So they have those in the Netherlands where these homes have the system where they're on a mast pole and they rise and sink with the tide. So that was the scheme for Tybee, was like give them amphibious architecture where the house could be sitting on the ground and you could enter the home normally, but when the water came, it would rise up instead of flooding.
Interesting. Gosh.
And you know what? I bet one day they're going to come back and you say, "Hey, we want to do that. Come back and
Yeah.
tell us about that again."
Yeah, that was those people at Tybee are awesome. You know, my family was from Savannah back in the 1700s, so I kind of like the coast. I go down there a lot. So
My husband and I used to live in Savannah, and that the road going out to Tybee will flood if we have heavy rains. I mean, you just can't get out there or get off.
it floods, and
Yeah.
then you're stuck.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
You
kind
just
of
have to
crazy.
wait?
We
Yeah,
went
you
out
have to
to eat out there one evening, and it was raining, and I was like, when we were coming back, I mean, the water was right up at the road.
Yeah, it'll go like a foot underwater during
Yes.
King's Tide.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Is that every day? Or?
No, it's during like high tide events. So
Wow.
for now.
For now.
Well, Cannon, I can't thank you enough for your
Yeah, of
time. I
course.
appreciate it. I'm looking forward to
It was
working
very
with you.
interesting.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
I
I
hope I
learned a
didn't
lot.
like overwhelm the.
No, it's we have so much to learn. I'm new to this. I think I can speak for Lulu as well. We're learning, but
As we go.
just
Yeah.
we're
We're-
just
we're
two
two blind
girls on a
squirrels.
mission.
Yeah, I like that too.
We're 2 blind squirrels.
There you go.
That's right.
Cool.
Well, we appreciate
Yeah,
it.
thank you so
thank
much for
you.
being here.
Yeah, of
And
course.
don't forget Maysville, because we need you.
Yeah.
We do
Well,
need you.
I love to see smaller towns, become better in
Yes.
the future, right?
Right. That's what we're after. Not a whole lot.
America's still relatively young, but we're getting some, longer teeth here, and I think we need to do better about protecting our historic areas and
too.
preserving our heritage and history when it comes to old buildings and,
You need to come see my house sometime.
Yeah.
She
I'm
has
pretty
the oldest house in Maysville.
201 years old.
Really?
Yes. It didn't get burned.
There you go.
Yeah.
There you go. Was it lifted up at some point and moved?
No,
I feel like some of those old houses
actually,
get
Wasn't
moved.
it turned?
I believe it was
They just
turned,
turned
but
the-
it was the original road through Maysville went straight. It was my driveway,
Oh,
and the Western Union stopped at my house. Apparently, from what I hear from the old timers,
yeah.
yeah, it's kind of cool.
And you're
That's
sitting
cool.
in the Maysville Hospital.
I
1862.
love this space. This space is amazing.
Yeah.
I want to know what goes on in here.
A lot.
There's like pool,
We'll never tell.
pinball, like
support,
drums,
support beams.
motorcycles.
Well, thank you so
Yeah,
much, and
of course.
we appreciate it. And I'm
Yeah.
sure everybody's going to be watching this episode a lot.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Cool.
Thank
right.
you so much.
All right.
Yeah. All right, and we'll
Thanks,
see you
guys.
next time on Blind Squirrel
Peace.
Talk. Bye.
Bye.